Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville politics, government, business, education, news, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. I am joined once again by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing just fine, Jesse, trying to get in the holiday spirit. It's a little tough sometimes, but working that toward that goal.
Yeah, ho, ho, ho.
Yeah.
I am happy to be back here in the studio. Our devoted listeners may remember that I was sick last week and had to call in, and I apologize in advance for any throat clearing, coughing, or other unpleasant seasonal noises. I'll try to keep them away from the microphone. I am feeling much better, though, so thanks for your well wishes out there. Let's see, we had several interesting things happen this week. The ballot is set for the 2024 Knox County elections, coming right up. We're going to talk about that. Mayor India Kincannon's middle housing plan on its second attempt through the Planning Commission got a more favorable hearing than it did the last time through. Interesting prediction forecast from the University of Tennessee for the state's economy for next year. We'll talk about that. We are gearing up for a big fight in the state legislature over school vouchers. We'll talk about that and what some of our local school board members are doing to prepare. And Scott, to start us off, City Council this week, Mayor India Kincannon, they proposed and voted for sort of a diverse set of projects, initiatives, investments in the Magnolia Avenue corridor of East Knoxville. What's going on Magnolia Avenue?
Well, about 30 or more than $30 million worth of investments going into Magnolia Avenue. A lot of it was voted on this week, as you said. And it's from one end of Magnolia to the other. You've got you start out at the far end in Burlington. They're going to the city's going to build a new fire hall there. It'll be a nice 2-bay fire hall on the currently empty lot, or the parking lot, but that's a block from basically across the side street from the current fire hall, which is really old and really small and really cramped and really dilapidated. It's not dilapidated. That's a little harsh, but it is time worn, and it needs repairs. They're going to spend almost $50,000 repairing it, but they're going to build a new fire hall there. A lot of the people in Burlington were very, very happy for that investment. The city is looking at Burlington as a place to focus its resources. You know, Burlington is kind of a little mini downtown kind of area there for that area of East Knoxville. And
for people who aren't familiar, I mean, probably a lot of people are, but Burlington, when we talk about it, is kind of the area where Martin Luther King Avenue comes in to Magnolia, right there.
Yeah, and it's across from the zoo. I mean, if you need a landmark The zoo is on the north side of Magnolia Avenue. On the south side of Magnolia Avenue, in that same stretch, is downtown Burlington. And the city has already invested $2 million in a streetscape project that they're doing down there to improve the street network in Burlington. And then this will be don't know what the cost will end up being. They're spending $700,000 to buy the property that the fire hall will be on. Then the fire hall will they're going to spend another little more than $300,000 on design work and all, and that will include some of the streetscape stuff. Is going to be, they have to accommodate that, and then they'll of course put it out for bid to build it. So that'll be more money down the road. We don't know how much yet, but that's going to go in. That's one thing. That's a big public investment. Then at the other end of Magnolia, down toward downtown near Caswell Park, the Swan Bakery building, which is a historic building. It's not as opulent as it once was if you look at the old pictures, but it's still a nice building on Magnolia. The Knoxville Leadership Foundation has bought it, and they're going to renovate it, and they're going to get a payment in lieu of tax agreement from the city and the county to help fund that. It's kind of an interesting proposal because most payment in lieu of tax projects are for-profit, private sector things where they're going to renovate a building and then lease out space, or you do lease out space, either retail or commercial and residential, all that stuff, to get income to pay for your part of the project. And the pilot is designed to kind of help with that financing. Well, in this case, there really isn't. It's a nonprofit. Knoxville Leadership Foundation is going to be putting their Knox Works job training program there, and they were kind of stuck. They've got a tenant for half the building, which keeps them from being exempt from paying property taxes on the whole building anyway. So they want the pilot to help with a $4.5 million renovation that they're going to be doing. That's, like I said, it's kind of an odd thing that they're doing. Then, and what the city's going to be doing is, after 5 years, they're going to look at, well, is the Leadership Foundation, were they able to raise enough money to do this? Were they able to sustain the program there? And if so, then they'll extend it for another 5 years. Now, in the middle of Magnolia, about the 2700 block, another private development is going in. This is a for-profit residential development. Jeffrey Nash and his Cortland group is bought 4 historic apartment buildings. They all date back to the 20s and 30s along Magnolia that are currently empty and dilapidated, and they're going to renovate them into 57 condo units and 8 what is called workforce apartments, which means basically fairly affordable apartments, especially in this market. That's kind of tough to do, but and they're going to be getting incentives from the city and the county. They're going to be they've created a tax increment financing district that encompasses those 4 properties, and then they're going to give a tax increment finance loan or grant to Cortland Group to help them with the financing of this, because it's really tough to get financing for major projects, especially renovation projects, especially in an area that hasn't had much investment over the past several decades. And that $500,000 grant will be paid for by the increase in tax revenues that this development should bring in. Now, that's the of how the financing works. The overall investment's going to be about $13 million right there in that stretch of Magnolia. So it is a little bit. It's not unusual necessarily for it to happen, but one of the things that was interesting is when they look at they get a third party to look at these projects, and the third party review looked at it, and there's what they look at is primarily is the internal rate of return, which is basically increase in value of the investment, and they try to get it in a range between 12 and 20%. And
that would be basically the developer's profit margin.
Yeah, it's essentially it's the profit they should realize if they sell the property after a certain amount of time. So it's not an annual profit; it's the increase in value of the investment, and it's 12 to 20% is typical in the real estate industry. It's kind of what you shoot for. It's what banks look at. If you can do that. This actually, even without the incentive, would come in at a little over 13%. So it's the low end of that expected range. But as Ben Bentley, who's the CEO or executive director and CEO of KCDC said, there's so much risk involved in this particular development. One thing is they don't even have comp properties for condos in this area because they're few and far between, and so there's a lot of risk involved. So they thought it would be appropriate to go ahead and do that, do this TIF district there.
Yeah, I mean, Magnolia is a little bit in the kind of situation that downtown was, say, 20 years ago, where you have people starting to do things, but it's still kind of unproven in terms of what the marketplace really is.
Yeah, it really is. And but even downtown, even 20 years ago, there were a lot of properties that were that cost a lot of money, and so in Magnolia, the Magnolia corridor, because of the disinvestment or the lack of investment over decades, it's just it's going to take and this is going to be a focus of the Kincannon administration and their in Mayor Kincannon's second term, but it's going to take a lot of investment to get that even close to anything about downtown. Another development there, and this Nash is involved in this, and this isn't really anything that's been approved or anything yet. He is going to be buying the Sturkey Altiger, I believe is how you pronounce that name, house on Cherry, at the corner of Cherry and Magnolia. We talked about it before. The state was going to put a parole office in there. And then the developer who owns the property was going to tear down this house. So yet another historic house was built in the 1920s. The state backed out because there was a lot of outcry over the decision to put a parole office in there, as well as over the potential demolition of this house. Nash, who is an avid historic preservationist, kind of stepped in, is buying the property. I don't know if it's supposed to close any day, if it hasn't already closed. He doesn't even have plans for it yet. He just bought it. Doesn't have plans for it, but he's going to be developing plans for it. So all that's going on. And then one other thing happened later in the week, and that's the federal government, the Department of Transportation, awarded Knoxville an $8 million grant to improve 3 intersections along Magnolia to reduce fatal crashes or severe crashes. The city is using that as part of its Vision Zero plan to eliminate roadway fatalities by 2040, and so that'll be $8 million. That will be going in to improve those intersections, sidewalks, the crosswalks, and various other improvements there. So a lot going on in Magnolia, from basically down close to the new stadium side all the way out to Burlington.
Right, both public and private. It strikes me that with Jeffrey Nash kind of developing seemingly a whole section there, people often look to, people like to have sort of cutesy little names for different parts of town. So if you had a whole stretch that was all developed by Jeffrey Nash, what do you think about Nashville? The Nashville district of Magnolia Avenue.
I think that's already taken.
Really?
Yeah. Right. And one of the things about that too is so many people from who ain't from around here will confuse Knoxville and Nashville all the time. So already,
yes, they do.
So it's already confusing enough for those folks, and especially and this is one thing we can talk about, the 20,000 or so new Tennesseans who've moved here from California in the last year or so.
Right.
So
some of them may still think they're in Nashville.
That's true.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, let's talk a little bit about school vouchers. We have talked about this before, of course. Governor Bill Lee, a couple of weeks ago, made a big announcement that that's going to be kind of his top priority going into this legislative session, is universal school vouchers. It'll be phased in over 2 years. When that initial announcement came out, we heard responses from a lot of our local Republican officials. Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally of Oak Ridge, he is on board with it. Our school board chair, Betsy Henderson, gave us a statement basically saying she was glad for parents to potentially have more choices, and that wasn't a surprise. Henderson ran both times that she's run for school board, or I guess she's actually had 3 campaigns at this point, as a proponent of school choice. So I thought it would be interesting to go and talk to another member of the school board, and we ran this story this past week, and that's Jennifer Owen, who's been on the board since 2016, but she's been politically active for longer than that. She is a retired teacher, and when she was a teacher, she was among the cadre of politically engaged teachers who are active through, the Knox County Education Association and who go to the legislature every year and lobby and so forth. And Owen has been a staunch opponent of vouchers, and so I thought it would be interesting to get her perspective as somebody who's sort of been fighting this, not exactly in the abstract. I mean, there have been concrete proposals for various kinds of vouchers before. She pointed out that going back to 2011, Governor Bill Haslam's first term, there was a bunch of noise about it sort of early on, and he was in favor of sort of some limited voucher programs. And so her perspective was kind of like, I've been fighting this for years. I'm ready for it. But she's never confronted, and voucher opponents in Tennessee have never confronted anything like what they're up against now, with this really full court press from a governor, from the Republican leaders of both the House and the Senate, and of course, as we know, these out-of-state groups, Americans for Prosperity, American Federation for Children, who are just flooding the state with money, flooding the state with lobbyists, flooding the state with people apparently literally going door to door, knocking on doors across Tennessee, advocating for school vouchers. And, Owen made a couple of, I thought, interesting points. On the one hand, like you'll hear people, opponents of vouchers, talk about this as sort of like an attempt to dismantle public education. And philosophically, at a certain level, I think you could say that that's true, because if you change the idea of public education from sort of a public good that is provided by taxpayers in the form of public infrastructure, public schools, to a private good that is provided by public taxpayers in the form of a check that goes to basically everybody who has a kid that they can then use, at a private school for homeschooling, et cetera. That is a pretty big philosophical shift. At the same time, Owen said that she doesn't anticipate that any time in the near future there would be some huge exodus. Most people are used to going to public schools. In fact, if you do polls of people, most people will tell you that they more or less like their local schools, even if they have concerns about the school system overall. And of course, their local schools are also where their neighbors are. It's where, there's a lot of built-in inertia in the system. And then, of course, it's not like there's unlimited capacity outside the system where, like, if in 2 years every parent in Knox County decided, I want to take my kid out of public school and send them somewhere else, well, there are not private schools to accommodate 60,000 students in Knox County right now. And so nothing, and it's not that easy to set up a school, No. And so, on the one hand, Owen kind of said that she doesn't think there's going to be some immediate huge, everybody just floods out of the school. At the same time, she said it doesn't take that to have an impact on the local district. For example, she ran some numbers like if you just took one kid out of every grade level at every school in the county, by itself, that would pull out, close to $3 million a year in funding because the state funding is pegged to those student populations, which, is pretty small. The school budget this year is like $660 million. They could absorb that. But there's a point where it becomes problematic because as you reduce those populations, you do not necessarily reduce the public cost because even if a school lost 30 kids, which you could say, well, theoretically, that should mean they could lose at least one teacher. Depending on how those kids are distributed, that might not be true. You might need the same number of teachers because you're taking 2 kids out of this classroom, 2 kids out of that classroom. And of course, those buildings are kind of like sunk costs. It costs the same to heat and cool a school and to run the plumbing and everything, regardless of whether there's 620 kids or 580 kids and so forth. And so over time, she does have this concern that this will end up costing taxpayers more, basically, because taxpayers would be paying both for the vouchers, which are going to come out of one section of the state budget, but those are paid for. That's paid for by taxpayers. And they're also going to be continued to pay to run the traditional public school system. And her anticipation is that a lot of the initial beneficiaries of this, and this has always been the argument against vouchers, right? Is that one of the biggest arguments against vouchers is, well, you're just writing checks to wealthy families who go to private schools. And proponents of vouchers have always kind of pushed back against that and have often framed the programs as being opportunity for low-income students in quote-unquote failing schools with lower overall academic performance and so forth. But Lee's proposal is basically removing that. It's removing any kind of means testing or income cap. And at least as initially proposed, and of course we haven't seen the bill on this yet, and whatever bill gets proposed is probably going to be amended or attempted to be amended in the legislature, so we'll see what it ends up looking like. But at least at the outset, Lee's proposal basically would do that. It would say that like every family in Knox County who's sending their kid to Webb, for example, which are mostly fairly affluent people, would be eligible to just get a check. I mean, it would just be an entitlement check that the state would just write you and say, here you go, regardless. And so that was kind of Owen's.
And almost every private school on Webb is of course the most expensive private school, but virtually every private school, and I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I don't. Every private school in Knox County, it's more than $7,000.
Right,
almost all. There are a couple that are around $7,000. Most of them are $10,000 or more.
Yep.
And these are high schools. I looked up high school tuitions and did not bring my numbers with me today. But
no, that's right. And I looked at that the other week, and there's only a couple of schools in Knox County currently that are at the $7,075 level that the governor is proposing this voucher to be set at. There's only a couple of schools in Knox County that are below that. and they are very small Christian schools. And so if you are not somebody who's interested in sending your kid to a very small, probably low-resourced, definitely very religious Christian school, any school that you use this voucher for, you would be paying money on top of it. And so, those are kind of Owen's bigger concerns. But, one interesting thing about Owen, she was for years the school board's designated sort of legislative liaison, because she's been very engaged in Nashville for, like I said, going back before she was even on the school board. But that got a little harder to sustain in recent years because she's an independent. She's running for re-election as an independent, but she is one of the more progressive members of the school board. She's a former teacher. She comes from kind of very much an advocate for traditional public education, I guess. And as the board has developed this new kind of Republican majority and has moved away from explicitly opposing vouchers, which they no longer do as part of their formal statement of legislative priorities, that mismatch, I think, got a little uncomfortable for everybody. And so now school board vice chair Steve Triplett, who's one of the more conservative members of the board, is the designated legislative representative for the board. And I asked Owen whether that bothered her, and she said no, she actually sees it as liberating because she doesn't have to think about representing the whole board when she goes to talk to legislators. She can just be an independent board member going and raising her own concerns, and she can say whatever she wants and oppose whatever she wants. So she will certainly be active on this, as I think will teachers across the state, public education groups across the state will be. But of course, as I said at the outset, there are these very well-funded pro-voucher forces out there too, and it's going to be a party. Seth, did you have something you wanted to throw in there?
I was just say, as you started it, we don't have a plethora of private schools available, and I would assume that in that pricing format that they use, it's going to start going up as this demand goes up if people start pushing to move their kids into private schools. So even now that $7,000 doesn't cover, except for a couple of schools that are available currently, I would assume the tuition's going to go up as these vouchers become available because of that demand and supply issue.
There's an interesting test of that. Iowa created a universal voucher system just a year or two ago, and one of the early findings from that is that most private schools in Iowa have raised their tuition. And they've done it in a way that is not, I think the Iowa voucher is around the same, about $7,000. And I think the average private school tuition went up $2,000 or $3,000. And so you can kind of see what's going on there, where the schools are able to raise their tuitions $2,000 or $3,000. So the schools are getting more money, but the parents who are now getting the vouchers are actually paying less because, tuition goes up $2,000 or $3,000, but you get $7,000 from the state. So your net expense as a parent goes down $3,000 or $4,000. And so it's, it's a good deal for the parents. It's a good deal for the schools. And as long as the taxpayers are happy to just be writing those checks and sending them out to people, then I guess it's okay for the taxpayers. But that does seem like something, as you say, from a basic market economics standpoint, that's what you would expect. And at least that initial experience in Iowa suggests that, we would likely see something like that here too. So,
okay. So on the Iowa one, was there any increase in availability? Did a significant number of new schools come in?
I haven't seen anything that looked at that specifically. Again, like that program is new. All of the states that have passed these in the last few years, they're very new. And so even if you anticipate that there would be maybe a little bit of a gold rush of people coming to open new schools, it, again, like I was saying before, it's hard to just start a school from scratch. And so you might anticipate to see that over time, but we probably just haven't had enough time in those states yet to see it.
And another item I was curious about that I haven't seen explicitly, and I think you mentioned it a second ago, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, is that it would be available to homeschool families as well to help offset the expenses of doing their homeschooling?
Yeah.
Or programs that they do. You
can use it for educational materials. There's been questions raised about this in other states, and it's been pretty wide open. If you want to take an educational field trip to Florida with your kids, I mean, that's something that has actually happened, that vouchers have paid for homeschooling families. Yeah, you can do it. I mean, presumably there will be some sort of regulations written in, but the impetus seems to be to make it as open as possible. And so there will be a lot of talk about that kind of stuff. I'm sure when we get to legislative hearings on this, people are going to be digging up any kind of like egregious story from anywhere in the country they can find. We're going to hear about all of this. But right. And again, that's, we do have some number of homeschooling families. I forget how many, in the 13,000 range, maybe in Tennessee right now. People who are already...
there's like 6 that live a couple doors down from me. There's one family, and then it's a large family. And I don't know. I don't know for a fact. I haven't talked to them about it, but the kids are always around. So I'm assuming they're homeschooled.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, let's say you're already homeschooling 6 kids, you would theoretically under this be eligible to get state entitlement funding of $42,000 a year for something you're already doing. That's going to be a good deal for a minority of people who are already doing these things. I think the question becomes how much appetite the tax-paying public has for just, and it is interesting. It's a little bit funny to me looking at the typical Republican resistance to programs that just send checks out to people, whether those are, welfare programs or food stamps or unemployment or whatever. There tends to be this conservative resistance to just writing people checks. And most of those programs, they keep loading up with new kinds of accountability. You got to take drug tests and you got to have work requirements and da-da-da. But what they're talking about with this, it sort of seems to exist in a magic realm that is not being treated like anything else, where it's like, no, this sounds great. We're just going to send checks to everybody. So, again, we're at the beginning stages of this conversation. We will see how it goes in the legislature. But it was, again, interesting to get Jennifer Owen's perspective on it, just because she's been fighting this fight for so long. And in a way, I think she feels like she was born for it. Okay, Scott, let's talk about the state's economy. We had an annual report come out this week. The University of Tennessee provides to the governor every year. What's it say?
Well, basically says Tennessee's economy is doing real well. It's doing better than the national average, although it's slowing down. That's the kind of the if you want just kind of the overall how we doing kind of thing. The our GDP is going down. It was over 9%, which is huge for in 2021. It's about 3.3% now. I'm sorry, about 4.8% now. And it will be going down. It'll be getting down to around 2% over the next couple of years. But it's still going to be outperforming the national economy in that way. Unemployment's the same way. During right at the beginning of the pandemic, when it first hit in 2020, unemployment shot up to over almost 16%. It's down to almost historic lows now, 3.3%. So I know the economy is doing fairly well. One of the reasons that Tennessee's economy is doing better than the national average, and it's probably the reason, is population growth. People are moving to Tennessee in droves. In 2020, 21, and 2022, more than 80,000 people, a net gain of 80,000 people in population in the state of Tennessee, which was a much higher increase than in previous years. And that has an impact all across the economy. I mean, just the basic increase in economic activity that many people coming to the state bring is significant. And then you have, of course, that's adding to the housing issue, the housing shortage that we talk about all the time here in Knoxville, and we'll be talking about it here in just a few minutes in more detail. It's not unique to Knoxville, and there are all kinds of reasons for it. There's, the building industry still hasn't recovered from the 2008 bubble burst, housing burst. They've got an employee shortage. They've qualified, certified employees. There are all kinds of things like that. Interest rates are going up. People are not selling their houses because they've they're locked into lower interest rates, and they don't want to have to go out and buy a new house. Even though they'll make more money off selling their house, they still have to buy a house at a much higher interest rate. One of so population growth is having a huge impact. One in the housing sector, another factor, and this is kind of one aspect of the economy that's not doing as well, and that's wages. Not only are you having all these increases in home prices, and in Knox County especially, Knoxville's home values grew faster than any other city in the country. But the wages aren't going up, and that's a real problem, and they're not expected to go up in the next couple of years. So, any relief from the soaring prices for new homes, the soaring prices for existing homes, and soaring rents, any relief for that is going to have to come from the supply side. There's going to have to either have to build more housing and more either affordable or mid-range housing. And that's one of the problems too, that all these people moving in and all these problems that the housing industry faces, is it's more economical for builders to build really big new houses, and so it's skewed. The market's skewed toward higher income buyers. And one other thing that this report focused on a lot was new business creation. And new business creation in Tennessee got a huge boost from the pandemic. There was there was stimulus money, both personally and for businesses. There's a lot of people had more time on their hands, like all those people who were unemployed at the beginning of the pandemic looked and they created businesses. A lot of online retail businesses were created, and the business formation in 2020 went up increased by nearly a quarter. And Knox County saw the biggest share of any county in Tennessee in new business creation. And in fact, the new business creation hit a wall last year statewide, where growth was pretty stagnant, except in Knox County. Last year, Knox County had 10 times the number of new business filings that Nashville had.
Wow.
So a lot of new businesses here. They, could be many reasons for that. Of course, all the reasons we already talked about. The Knoxville Chamber says, that we've got a good ecosystem for startups and new businesses. And
we also have a whole bunch of university students. So I wonder how many of the people starting businesses are within a year or two of leaving college.
We don't have those.
We
don't have those demographics. And one data point, and I asked one of the authors of the study about this. One of the key data points we don't have is how sustainable these businesses are. Mm-hmm. I asked about that, and basically,
right, because a high percentage of most new businesses,
a lot of them fail anyway. Of course, it's only been 1 or 2 years for this surge, and they haven't done the data on business dissolution. They could, they just haven't yet. And part of it is because it's real soon. If you're a lot, even shoestring businesses can stick around for a year or two, not do very well, but they can still
the real way
around.
to track this would probably be to look at like city and county business tax, because that's how you see how many actual operating businesses there are in the city. And county.
But as far as the data that they used for this report, and one of the things that they pointed out, and they kind of did a comparison with national stuff. Tennessee's doing very well nationally, but it's two different data sets. It's apples and oranges, because the national data does not include franchisees. If the state and local data, if you're a private business owner and you get a Starbucks franchise, then that counts as a new business. It doesn't in national data.
Right.
So, but Tennessee's still doing well on the national data too. But
I'm going to add on real quick because I discovered this year, because I did dissolve a business in the process of the 23 year. It's not particularly easy. There's a lot of paperwork you got to go through to do it, and at some point, if you're not doing a lot of revenue or anything, you don't have a significant tax, and so it's almost easier just to pay the $25 property tax for your business in a year than it is to actually go through the process of shutting it down. And so that's another number to that data point as we start seeing some of them fall off. It's like, if you're not doing a lot of business, it's not that hard to just keep it technically open, even though you're not doing anything.
Right.
We almost made the decision just to keep it, because trying to track the paperwork down was going to cost us more through accounting than another year of taxes.
Yeah, I have done some, for Compass purposes, I've done some wrangling with business forms at the state, and it could be easier, let's say. Well, Scott, it's interesting what you're saying about the gap between housing prices and salaries and wages, because that starts to put a bit of a dent in what has historically been the argument here, because Tennessee, not least because it's a right to work state, has always had lower median salaries than the country as a whole. We've always been one of the lower paid states. The Southeast in general has been one of the lowest paid parts of the country. But the argument against that, or the context for that from boosters, has usually been, well, yeah, but our cost of living is low. And that was true for a long time. But like in Knoxville, that's not really true anymore. Our housing costs are actually higher than the national median. But our wages are still down there, and so that gap, I think, gets harder to sustain for a lot of people who are working here and living here and are struggling.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues that this brings up, is that with low wages, the housing shortage and the housing and especially the way that the market is responding to the housing shortage, or that the industry is, it's going to be worse before it gets better. We're not, basically as a society, we're not building enough houses. We're building houses that are too big and too expensive. And the reason is because that's what the market rewards. The market rewards, larger houses at higher price points, and there are plenty of people who can pay that money. That's the thing, is it's not that they're building these big houses and nobody's buying them, and so people who are lower on the income scale, are out of luck. Everybody, they're selling those as fast as they can build them too. And so the one thing about this housing shortage is it is across all price points and all income levels, with possible exception of those who make astronomical salaries. Other than that, and still, even so, if you're somebody who makes 7 figures and you want a big house and you want a new big house, it's still going to take 2-3 years to build. It's still going to, there's still a shortage, quote unquote, in that area of the market.
Even if you're not struggling a lot.
Nobody's weeping for these folks, and we know they're not going to be homeless tomorrow because they're still able to live in their 8,000 square foot house while their 12,000 square foot house is being built. Don't get me wrong. We're not weeping for them.
I have a quick question. I'm not sure how to word this question per se. But these 7-figure people that we're kind of teasing about right now, is there any conversation in the study about how much if that is skewing the income conversation, as far as we have some of these high earners coming in from out of state, and that's bringing up the average income, even though it's not really true on the ground? And or are there, like we've heard it talked about, a lot of these remote workers moving to lower cost states to get more out of their buck? And is there anything about people making money out of state, as far as their job is technically in New York or California still, but they can work from home here, and how much that is affecting our economy as far as its income from another state theoretically coming in, even though they kind of live here?
Not really. They didn't go to great detail on anything like that. One thing is, you're talking about, again, people moving here. Well, one thing that's interesting is they did have a list of the top 10 origin states where people are moving to Tennessee, and the top 10 destination states for people moving out of Tennessee. And Tennessee's traditionally swapped residents essentially with Florida, Georgia, Alabama, even Illinois. Illinois always had a big pipeline to, especially West Tennessee. But mostly southern states, South Carolina, and for instance, in Florida, it was the number one state that both coming and going, and the net difference was 5,000 more people moved to Tennessee from, at the end of the day, Tennessee had a net gain of 5,000 people in that exchange of people from Florida. The big exception's California. California, more than 20,000 people moved here from California last year, and it was just, and it's an anomaly. Nobody from Tennessee, or very few people from Tennessee, are moving to California. In fact, that's not even listed, so can't even say what the disparity is. But this is the second highest state of people migrating to Tennessee, and typically when people move from higher income, higher wealth states, they come here, they can buy bigger houses than they could afford in California. They can, a lot of them may be coming here and opening businesses here, or they may actually be working there, but they're paying taxes here. So, that once again, that goes back to the growth in population is really stimulating the economy in Tennessee. And if you wanted to look at that glass as being half empty, it's basically saying, oh, the state of Tennessee really isn't that great. It's just that more people are moving here. It's not that anything the state of Tennessee's doing other than attracting people to move here.
And partly because even as our own costs go up relative to California or to Florida, we are still a less expensive place to live in general. And so, like you're saying, people with some means can do pretty well by selling a house in California and moving to Hardin Valley or wherever, which we've certainly seen a lot of.
Yeah, I remember. I'm old enough to remember back when Whittle Communications put their headquarters, basically built Whittlesburg over the now federal courthouse, and people from all over the country, New York and California and Chicago, moved here for those jobs, and they could sell a split level rancher in a Chicago suburb or a Connecticut suburb of New York, and move here and move to Sequoia Hills and still have money left over. It was
and that was the early 90s.
It was early 90s.
Knoxville was really cheap then, relatively. Yeah. Well, let's keep talking about housing a little bit, because Mayor Kincannon's middle housing plan was back at Planning Commission this past week. It had been there the month before and had not been approved by planning commissioners, but a friendlier reception this time around.
Yeah, the last time was October. It didn't pass as a 5-5 vote of the commissioners who were at the meeting. There were only 10 of 15 who voted. But then they voted to reconsider. The city, in the meantime, did a lot of public. One of the things that concerned planning commissioners is they didn't think there was enough public outreach by the city, especially people who lived in these neighborhoods. So the city did a lot of public outreach. Neighborhood groups, individuals who live in neighborhoods, neighborhood leaders, nonprofits, business owners, those kinds of things. And so they did a lot of that. They also tweaked the measure some, and it came back mostly around the edges, and it came back, and they voted to approve it on 11-2 vote this time. Now, one thing we'll get back for those who either don't remember, haven't been listening, whatever. Middle housing is duplexes, triplexes, small, and by small I mean 8 units or fewer apartment buildings, townhouses, that used to be common in cities, but have been zoned out for the most part. This would zone them back in, and this would apply to the city's traditional neighborhoods inside the I-640 Beltway and kind of that fan-shaped area around downtown, between the river and I-640, and it's been fairly, one of the things is the city's doing this to do basically 2 things: increase density, and the city is growing as well as the rest of the state. People are moving here. But in order to accommodate people who want to live inside the city limits, they're going to have to, the city's going to have to increase density, and that's one way of doing it. And the other is to give people more choices in housing. People that might not necessarily want a single family house, might not mind living in a duplex or a townhouse, those kinds of things. So, one thing it's not, that kind of is a misconception that a lot of people are throwing around out there. I've seen a couple of media reports where they talk about this from other outlets. It's not affordable housing. Get that out of your head. This is not designed to be affordable housing. It's designed to be new housing. It could end up being affordable housing, but that's not the goal. The goal is to create more units, not necessarily cheaper units. But anyway, there's been community opposition, not because of that, but because of the big concern of a lot of communities is the possibility of demolishing houses to build, single family houses to build duplexes or triplexes, converting single family houses into duplexes or triplexes. Those are big concerns. The city has really, tried to make the point that most of the development they foresee would be in infill housing, which would be those empty lots that are in this, neighborhoods all across the city, and that they would be there. But
it's not unthinkable that a landlord that, say, owns a maybe sort of dilapidated small house in one of these neighborhoods could see the benefit of going ahead and knocking it down and building something where they could have 2 or 3 units to rent and
absolutely
double or triple their income.
Yeah, they could do that if it makes sense economically to demolish the house and then do it. I mean,
but in a way that would still accomplish what the city's trying to do, which would be to add more units.
Yes, and of course, a lot of the concern is coming from some of the more historic neighborhoods. If these are neighborhoods, if you've got a historic overlay, it's a lot harder. That's still in place, and it would be a lot harder to go into, say, Old North Knoxville or 4th and Gill, and do that, because one of the things about these historic overlays is basically you don't mess with the exterior of the house, and so if you wanted to turn a single family house into a triplex, you can't put 2 doors on the house, 2 additional front doors on the house. I mean, you might be able to design it where it's around the back of the house, which is a little bit easier to do in most historic overlays. But there's a lot of protection still in place for these historic neighborhoods that are designated historic, but those that are not. The neighborhood I'm in is not designated historic neighborhood. It could be very easily, I could do that. We could probably finagle a way to not use the upstairs of the house and do that, but we're not going to. But that is the thrust of this. There were some minor changes. One of the changes that was kind of interesting is originally, if you wanted to build one of these, you couldn't get variances. If it was slightly, there was something with your lot that, setback variance or something like that, you couldn't get a variance for it. In fact, the East Tennessee Realtors, that was one of their major objections, is you just couldn't get a variance. And one of the tweaks the city made was okay, yeah, you can still go through the Board of Zoning Appeals to get a variance if necessary, but they strongly discourage it in the ordinance amendment. It's strongly discouraged. Another thing is parking. They reduced slightly reduced the amount of parking that's off-street parking that's required. The idea is to get parking on street in these neighborhoods. So again, these are traditional historic neighborhoods where on-street parking is common, and they want to encourage walkability and that sort of thing. So it's not onerous. You still essentially, technically, it's 0.7 spaces per unit. In reality, it's 1. So that is that's something that also the realtors and builders kind of objected to, and it was taken care of. Some other minor adjustments were made, and now it is passed though out of Planning Commission. Most of the technical stuff has been done. A lot of the conversation was very technical about at the Planning Commission meeting on Thursday, but now it goes to City Council, and or City Council's a different animal. They are
less technical, more political.
Less technical, more political, and we'll see if kind of where the objections will, I'm sure, come from the same places, and we'll see if they have a little bit more sway with City Council than they had with Planning Commission.
Well, and I think it's always important with this to give the caveat that for as much as we have talked about and everybody has talked about middle housing, especially, it's been a major topic all year here, nobody anticipates that this is a major, that it's going to have a major impact one way or the other, particularly when we talk about increasing housing. Tim Hill, who's the chair of the Planning Commission and of course ran for City Council this year, again, making the point that this is at most going to be an incremental benefit in terms of increasing housing supply, and that if the city wants to, which it clearly does, significantly increase supply, you really need to look at multifamily housing at a much bigger scale, at big apartment complexes and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and this is something we'll be reporting on this week. Is the one thing is this is a small part of the housing situation, and Mayor Kincannon is going to be making it part of a much broader, comprehensive housing strategy that is going to be developed in the first couple of months of the year, and we'll have a little bit more on that this week. But it should not be considered a panacea. I think one of the reasons it's gotten a lot of attention, and it's certainly one of the things that one of the reasons that I've tried to give it a lot of attention in my reporting, is that it is something that's old and new. I mean, it's something that neighborhoods had up until the late 1940s, when zoning changed and zoning to favor single family houses. I mean, the neighborhood that I live in is one of these neighborhoods. There are small apartment complexes. There are duplexes. I don't know if there are any triplexes, but I know there are duplexes. And they're all kind of interspersed through the neighborhood. It's a very walkable neighborhood. That's the kind of thing that they're trying to push. For instance, there's an apartment building 1 block from my house that could not be built under current zoning laws, and that's the thing and it's a nice little apartment complex. It's full all the time. It's the great neighbors, and so this would enable somebody to build a complex, build an apartment building like that in another empty lot in our neighborhood,
right?
And so, but it's small. It's not. We're not talking about 350 unit multi-building projects, and we're not talking about the big apartment buildings running down that are being built on Cumberland Avenue. We're talking about very small.
Sort of a new urbanism that is also old urbanism.
Yeah, and these are one of the things is the design guidelines with these, would keep them in scale with the other houses in the neighborhood.
Right.
So you're not wouldn't have an 8-story apartment building in the middle of a street of 1 and 2 story houses. So
right. All right. Well, another thing that happened this past week, on Thursday, the filing deadline passed for the 2024 Knox County elections, which are really right around the corner. The primary is going to be March 5th. It's the same day as the presidential primary. And then the county general election will be August 1st. And, Scott, we have a loaded ballot.
Boy, do we. This is the most crowded ballot I've seen in Knox County.
It's pretty interesting. I think it shows a heightened level of political engagement in our increasingly polarized era that everybody likes to talk about. Also, it definitely shows in particular the increased level of activity we're seeing from the county Democratic Party, which we've talked about, because these are county races, and both at the county-wide level and then in a lot of the county districts, these are areas that have typically been Republican and where Republicans certainly seem to have obvious advantages. But the Democrats are trying hard to not let races go uncontested. And so it's pretty interesting. Of all the races on the ballot, there is only one where there will be no competition at all, and that is criminal court Judge Hector Sanchez, who was appointed by Governor Bill Lee to fill a vacancy a couple of years ago, and he's a Republican, and he is running without opposition. And so, congratulations, Judge Sanchez. You can relax, but nobody else can. So we have 2 county-wide offices up, besides the judge, the county law director and the property assessor. And in the county law director's race, we have an incumbent, David Book, who's a Republican, and he is seeking a second term, and he is facing both a primary challenge from Daniel Herrera, young Republican attorney, former chair of the Knox County Republican Party, bit of a firebrand, bit of a controversial figure, even and maybe especially among Republicans here, and he's kind of positioning himself as running against the old courthouse crowd and so forth. And then whoever comes out of that primary will face Jackson Fenner in the general election, running as a Democrat, which he also ran for this office previously. He's making another run here. And then in the property assessor's race, incumbent John Whitehead is term limited out. People with long memories may remember that. So Whitehead has served 8 years now. Before him, Phil Ballard served 8 years. Before him, John Whitehead served 8 years. So they've kind of gone back and forth. Ballard is running again, but at least on paper, he looks to be at a bit of a disadvantage in the Republican primary against Jackie Raley, who is Whitehead's chief deputy and has assembled an impressive list of contributors, and she is entering this race with a lot more money in her pocket than Ballard, and so it's possible that this will be the election that breaks that, Whitehead to Ballard to Whitehead chain.
It's like the governorship of Tennessee was that way for a few years.
Exactly. But then there's also a Democrat there, so whether it's Raley or Ballard in the general election, they're going to face Democratic candidate Drew Harper. And then we have a bunch of county commission and school board races. One interesting thing to me about this is there are an unusual number of incumbents this year choosing not to run, people who would be eligible for another term but choosing not to run. So 1st District County Commission, Daisha Lundy is not seeking re-election. 4th District County Commission, Kyle Ward is not seeking re-election. 8th District, Richie Beeler is not seeking re-election. So that's unusual. It's more often the case that people who get elected to that first term go ahead and run for a second one. That's what we have tended to see.
Yeah, and we had the same thing happen in city council.
Yeah.
The city council election this year.
Yep.
When Janet Testerman decided not to run for re-election.
Yep. And we, again, historically we haven't seen that a lot, but we're seeing it more lately. Does this reflect, like we've been talking about, the polarized environment, that some people are not finding it that much fun to be on these local bodies? I don't know. But so the result of this is that in the 1st District, which is the most Democratic district on county commission and the only majority-minority district in the county, we're actually going to have 2 primaries. This is the one seat where there are primaries in both parties, even though it is a heavily Democratic district. So you kind of got to give whoever ends up being the Democratic nominee probably the edge here. But former Commissioner Evelyn Gill, who Daisha Lundy beat in the Democratic primary 4 years ago, is running again to take that seat back. And she's running against Damon Rawls in the Democratic primary. Lundy has endorsed Rawls. And then in the Republican primary, we have Charles Frazier running as a Republican. He's run for several offices in the past, mostly as a Democrat, but this time choosing to run as a Republican. But he's facing Justin Hurst, who's a first-time candidate who kind of comes out of the anti-mandate, anti-vaccine, kind of, I guess, Trumpier regions of the local Republican Party. He's an interesting candidate to be running in such a heavily Democratic district. But we'll see what comes out of that. In the 2nd District, we do have an incumbent actually seeking re-election, Courtney Durrett, former chair of the county commission. She's a Democrat. There's no primary at all in this race, so there'll just be a general election. She's running against Republican Debbie Phillips, and there's an independent candidate, Ethan Grantham, who's a KPD officer, running as an independent there. In the 4th District, as we mentioned, Kyle Ward not running for re-election. 2 Republican candidates, and Ward is a Republican, but this is the 4th District is probably the most purple district in the county. It's the only district right now that is represented by a Republican on county commission and a Democrat, Catherine Bike, on the school board. So it's clearly a district that is capable of voting in either direction. So Republicans Garrett Holt and Liz Tombras are running in the primary there, and they will face Democrat Shane Jackson in the general election. Out in the 5th District, very Republican 5th District, it covers Farragut and Concord, currently represented by John Schoonmaker, who is term limited. Scott, there are 5 Republicans running for that seat. And, primaries are a plurality election. So it's conceivable that any one of these 5, and it's Brad Hall, who's a Knox County Sheriff's Office officer, Angela Russell, Dale Skidmore, Tony Scott, and Brian Walker. If any one of them gets more than, 25% of the vote, they'd have a pretty decent shot at being the Republican nominee.
It'd be tough for the winner of that one, probably, to claim any kind of mandate from the Republican Party, but it's a heavily Republican district. So you could very easily and in a lot of ways most likely end up with a county commissioner there who came through with a small percentage of the actual primary vote. But then there is a Democrat there as well. S. Arthur Moore is running out there. In District 6, also pretty Republican, Hardin Valley and Carnes. Currently represented by Commission Chair Terry Hill, who's well known out there. She served a couple terms on school board before, representing that district before running for, or maybe she served one term on school board and now is in her first term on commission. But she's facing a Republican primary challenge from Julie McBee Fritz, who is a pretty well-known community advocate out there who has been especially concerned about growth and development in the area. And I think she's probably going to be talking a lot about that. And then speaking of growth and development, the Democrat in that race is Daniel Edward Green, who's the head of Hardin Valley Planning Advocates, another organization very concerned about growth and development in West Knox County. So that is what that whole race is going to be about in both the primary and in the general election. 8th District in East Knox County, where Richie Beeler is not running for re-election. DJ Corcoran, pretty well-known local figure, former
public information officer for the Knoxville Fire Department. He's been out there running for about a year. And a lot of times when as a Republican, and a lot of times when people, make that early an announcement, you assume that what they're trying to do is kind of clear the field a little bit and avoid having, significant challenges, but that did not work. He has actually 2 Republican challengers in the primary, Cara Daly and Adam Thompson. Adam Thompson's interesting. He just got in the race. He's a farmer, and he's been real active in the discussion around the county's growth plan and raising concerns about the way that plan might designate some of that prime East Knox County farmland for future development. And so I think, again, we're going to hear a lot about growth and development out there. And then whoever comes out of that primary is also going to face a Democrat, Charles Chandler. And District 9, interesting district, South Knox County, includes, of course, South Knoxville. South Knoxville skews pretty Democratic, but once you get outside city limits, the district overall is pretty Republican. But, the most recent race we had down there was a school board race in 2022, which was pretty close between Democrat and Republican. It's a relatively competitive district. 2 Republicans running. Andy Fox, who's a local attorney, again, was very active in the anti-mandate movement, is a major proponent of Second Amendment rights, and practices a lot of law around that, and is, again, bit of a right-wing firebrand, I guess you could say, and he's facing Barry Neal in the Republican primary, and Barry Neal has been endorsed by Carson Daly, who's the Republican incumbent there. And then in the general election, the winner of that primary is going to face Democrat Matthew Park, who made a pretty respectable run for state legislature a couple of years ago, and an independent named Stacey Bryan Smith. So, again, lots of people on the ballot. Looking at the school board, we have 4 seats up. And again, we're seeing incumbents in 3 of those seats choosing not to seek re-election. School board incumbents can always run for re-election because they are not term limited. But in District 3, Daniel Watson is not seeking re-election. District 5, Susan Horn, who served 2 terms, she's not running again. And then in District 8, Mike McMillan, who's the longest-serving member of the school board, he's been on it since 2010. He is not seeking re-election either. So we're going to get, at a minimum, 3 new school board members. But all of those seats are contested. So in District 2 is the one school board district where the incumbent, Jennifer Owen, who we were talking about a little bit earlier about vouchers, she is running for re-election. Interestingly, as an independent, like we said, she tends to be one of the more progressive members of the board, but she's very opposed to the return of partisan races to the school board, and she has chosen to not run as a party affiliate. She is running for re-election as an independent, and she's facing a Democratic challenger, Ann Templeton, and then another independent, Pat Paulus. So interestingly, that district, which is a North Knoxville district that kind of stretches over, stretches up into part of Fountain City, is one of the more Democratic districts in the county. This is the one race where there's no Republican candidate. They've just not going to do it. But it'll be interesting to see if Owen, this is the first time we've seen an incumbent since we've made this change back to partisan school board races, where an incumbent is running as an independent. And so this will be kind of a test of, can an independent candidate win in a basically partisan environment. District 3, where Watson's not running, we have 2 Republicans in the primary, Robert Daspit and Angie Goddard. And then there will be a Democrat, Patricia Fontenot Ridley. In the general election, District 5, which again is Farragut and Concord, Republican Lauren Morgan is running against Democrat Terry Whitaker, so no primary there. We won't get to that one until August. And then in District 8, there's only a primary. This is the one seat where there's no Democrat running. 2 Republicans, Tommy Lakins and Travis Wright, have both qualified to run. Now, the one caveat to all of this is that any of these candidates can choose to withdraw by this coming Thursday, the 21st, and then their name would not be on the ballot. But as it is right now, Scott, that's a lot of politicking.
It is a lot of politicking, and voters are. It would help if they did their homework, looking into this,
and we will be there to help you do that.
We will help them do that, because a lot of these people, like you said, there are incumbents who aren't running for re-election. A lot of the people who are running aren't very well known among the general public. Some of them may have been politically active, might be well known in their area, in their communities, and that's of course where they're running. So that's understandable. But voters are really going to have to they're going to have to reach the voters. They're going to have to educate the voters on who they are and what they want to do and what they hope to accomplish. And more so than a lot of other elections where you do have a lot of incumbents and familiar names.
Yep. And of course, depending on where you live, you may not actually have, there are those couple of countywide races, the law director, property assessor, everybody in the county can vote for those. But, if you live in the 7th district, for example, you don't have any. There are no contests for you this year.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit variable depending on where you are. But in a way, that makes it more complicated because people, there are some districts where the county commission seat is up, but the school board seat is not, and vice versa. So we will be doing everything we can at CompassKnox.com we'll, of course, be looking at each of these races individually, introducing you to all of these folks, talking about who's donating to whom, what they are all standing for. But again, this is and as we were talking about there's a lot of primaries. All of those are coming up in just a couple of months. And so we're all going to have to do our homework here pretty soon.
Absolutely. We're going to have to do our homework too.
Oh, yeah. So. I don't know who most of these people are at the front end. I'll tell you that.
And I'll say this, at least for District 4 here, I've already had at least 2 door knockers out and about for this District 4 commission race.
Mm-hmm.
And so be prepared to start meeting these candidates, whether you want to or not, I suppose, because, like you said, District 4 is the purplish one, and there's a lot of hope, I guess, for the Democrats to get in this district. And so they're starting early. That's for sure. So be ready for your mailbox. Make sure your mailbox is clean and ready, and make sure your doorbell works because you're going to get it.
That's right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and talk about next week. Just a couple of things coming up. Of course, we are heading into the Christmas holiday, so things are going to slow down significantly once we get to the second half of this coming week, and then probably stay pretty slowed down straight through New Year's. But I do have a couple of things before we get there. County Commission is having its monthly voting meeting on Monday. Not a lot of really exciting stuff on the agenda. The most interesting thing on the agenda was this proposal that we had talked about a little bit before for the members of the Knox County Merit System Board of Directors to be able to be politically active in campaigns other than the sheriff's campaign, which was a request that some members of that board had made. County Commission actually voted that down at their work session last Monday. It was a split vote, 6-5, but they did vote to not recommend that and to keep the restrictions on political activity by members of that board in place. And because they voted to deny it at the work session, it's not even going to be on the agenda for the voting meeting. So that's taken care of. A couple of other sort of not very controversial development items and so forth on the agenda. So I am personally hoping for a short meeting on Monday, but that's always dangerous to say out loud. We'll see how it goes. Maybe more interestingly, on Tuesday, we're going to have the next meeting of the county's Growth Policy Coordinating Committee. Both of these meetings, Monday and Tuesday, are at 5 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County Building. The Growth Committee, we've talked about this. They are looking to update the county's growth plan. Again, I was just talking about potential impacts on, say, farmland in East Knox County. There are several groups of residents in some of the more outlying areas of the county that are raising concerns about this plan and the ways that it would designate currently rural areas for more intensive kinds of development. So we will probably hear more discussion about that at this meeting on Tuesday. Interestingly, there will not be a vote. Initially, they said there was going to be a vote of this committee to recommend or not recommend these changes. We talked about this last week, that that committee doesn't have exactly the authority to vote this plan up or down. They can just recommend it or not recommend it. The real votes will be in the hands of County Commission, City Council, and the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen. All three of those will have to eventually sign off on any changes for them to take effect. But even at that, they are not pushing it to a vote. I guess there was some desire for more discussion, letting people, weigh in a little bit more before they ask the members of that committee to actually vote on it. So that won't happen until sometime after the first of the year.
Yeah, I think of course, one of the big sticking points there is some of the farmland in East Knox County. That the last meeting, that was a big, and the two meetings they've had, that's been a big topic of discussion. So there may be some changes in that. In fact, the representative on the committee from the Soil Conservation District proposed not changing anything about rural areas because, especially in East Knox County. So, as an effort to discourage development in areas that are where there are good soils and a lot of farmland.
But of course, what those interests are up against is what we were just talking about before: the push to have more housing, to have greater density in more parts of the county.
And where do subdivisions go?
Yep,
farms.
Yep, for sure.
So
we will have more discussion about that this coming week, and I guess we will be back here next week to talk. Yes, Seth, we're not going on Christmas break.
Bah humbug.
So, you guys won't get the joy of the video version we did last year with the hats and that whole thing. We did have eggnog last year. If that's going to come back up,
we will have eggnog again. Let's plan on eggnog for next.
Then I'm not even going to call it work.
All right. So we will be back to talk about those things and anything else that happens next week. Thanks as always to Lord Seth Barber here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.